Hi folks, welcome back to another video. So as you can see, I've got a lot of pieces laid out on the table. This is going to be a fairly big model this time, so let's get into it. So let's take a closer look at all the pieces. Now, as you can see, I'm going to be making Admiral Ackbar from Return of the Jedi. And this is from SW3D. I've printed this guy in 1/6 scale. Now, he has quite a large base because he is sat on a chair. So quite a lot of pieces to this. It's a little bit more complex than ones I've done just recently, but I'm up for the challenge. Now, I think the key to this model is going to be to work smarter rather than work harder. So with that in mind, I've done quite a bit of prep work already, which will go a long way towards the finished result. And a large part of that prep work is deciding which colours to prime the model with. So, as you can see, for the base of the chair, and the chair itself, I have sprayed the whole thing in Chaos Black. For all the clothing of Admiral Ackbar, his majority of it is white. So what I've done is I've sprayed it to begin with in this very light grey primer, and then I sprayed over the top of that with white and just made sure to leave a little bit more of the grey towards the bottom, just to give me a little bit of a fade into shadows. For the skin parts, I have just simply sprayed those grey. And for the console and pipes and all that kind of stuff for the chair, again, I have used a white primer. Okay, so that just about covers everything I've done to get to this stage. So now we're all up to speed. Let's crack on with the painting. For his vest, I'm going to start with an all-over base coat using this bone white. Okay, so now that paint has had some time to dry, you can see I've also used the same colour across the belt. What I'm going to do now is add a little bit of shadows into this fabric. So to do that, I'm going to take some of these soft pastels, and I've chosen, because obviously we're dealing quite a light colour already, I'm going to go with this rather light sort of dingy orange. And it's just a case of getting some of the pastel onto your brush, and then just working it into some of the shadows and the creases. So as I say, because this is quite a light colour, I'm obviously using quite a light colour to shadow it with. Now, if I'm doing it at this stage, because it's going to look a little bit heavy, and I'm going to come in afterwards and do some dry brushing to lighten this up, which will also help blend these pastel shadows in a bit better. So it's just a case of working around the model, and putting in all these shadows where you can sort of see the creases and folds, or just where you want to add some yourself. So you can start to see shadows being put in now. Okay, so with those shadows in, what I'm going to do now is a dry brush using some bold titanium white. So I'm just going to get most of the paint off my brush, and then just test it against my thumb so I'm happy with how much has been left behind. And it's going to be a dry brush over all of this tan colour. So just working in a sort of circular motion. And what this will do is will help brighten up the overall colour of the vest, which is what I'm trying to do, and it will also help fade some of these shadows in so they look a little bit more natural and less stark. Next up, I am taking a little bit of gunmetal silver and just to paint in all of the emblems across his chest. Next up, I'm taking some yellow ochre, and I'm just going to use this to paint the stripe that runs all the way up the side of the trousers and up the side of the body as well. Next up, I'm just taking some leather brown and following some photo reference, just painting in a couple of the little insignias. And then I've mixed some olive green into that leather brown, and I'm just going to do a couple of bit more of the insignias. And then I added a touch of that Stegodon scale green into that mix I already made, and this should be for the ones across the middle here. Looking at reference material, it looks to me like the stripe along the side here is actually quite grubby. There's a lot of sort of brown texture I can see from photos. So to achieve that weathering, I'm just going to take some brown pastel and just start to work it into some of the folds and creases. For the boots, I'm going to start with some neutral grey and just paint in the soles. Then taking some dark grey, I'm just going to stipple a little bit here and there just to give the boots a little bit of wear on the tread. And then I'm going to repeat that step, this time using a little bit of leather brown. And then finally, I have just sprayed each of the boots with some satin varnish to give it a nice reflective look, to make it look a little bit more sort of leather-like. Okay, we're going to turn to the skin parts next, and for this I'm going to use equal measure of mephiston red mixed in with leather brown, and what that's going to give us is a reddy brown, funnily enough. So I think this should be, I'm just sort of eyeballing this colour, and so I think it's approximately what we see on screen, but obviously we're going to come in later and jazz it up and do all sorts of highlights later. But yeah, for now I think that's a fairly close colour to what I want, so I'm just going to base coat both the head and the hands with this. Next thing I'm going to do is add in the sort of green speckly spots he has all over his skin. So for that I've taken some Caliban green and I've just sort of mixed it into the colour, the pre-existing skin colour we already had, just so it blends a little bit nicer and there isn't such a huge shift between the two. So I don't think there's any sort of real rhyme or reason to this. Let's just basically start to put in little patterns all around the skin. Next up, I'm going to mix in a little bit of this Screamer pink in with that sort of reddy brown concoction we made earlier. Again, just to sort of blend the two colours so it's not too stark. And I'm just going to use this to paint in the tongue. Next up, I'm going to take some of this Reichland Flesh Shade, which is a sort of a dark red, dark pink type of wash. You mostly use it on sort of skin colours, that kind of thing, but it should be perfect for what I'm trying to do here. So this is going to be a fairly liberal coating of this stuff, and it's just essentially going to act as a tint whilst darkening down the recesses and starts to blend some of these colours together a little bit. Next up is a dry brush using some of this Parasite Brown, and I'm just going to use this all over the skin and just sort of taking my time to sort of slowly work this in. Obviously concentrating on all the raised areas. And this will just again help to blend in the sort of the green spots and the rest of the skin colour. So here's sort of a before and after. So this is before the dry brush, and this is after, so this is the effect I'm going for. Now, to capture Admiral Ackbar's very sort of sparkly yellow eyes, I've been playing around with some colours, and I've decided to mix this Contrast Bad Moon Yellow and this Runefang Steel, and it gives me a sort of a metallic-y, yellowy, slightly greenish colour. So let's see how this works. It's very thin because obviously contrast is pretty thin and so is metallics, but yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I'll put a couple of coats on and we'll see how that looks. Next up is black for the centre of the eye, and whilst I've got this paint out, I'm also going to paint the fingernails of each hand as well. And then finally, I thought the eyes were looking a little bit plain, so I've just added a couple of dots of pure white, one bigger than the other on each eye, just to give the idea of a bit of reflection. So what I'm going to do now is spray all of the skin parts with a satin gloss varnish to make him look a little bit more sort of wet looking. And then I'm going to do a gloss varnish over the eyes. Okay, so turning to the base, all I have done so far is primered the main part, a nice black colour, did that both sides, and I've also put in some of these felt pads just to make sure that the space is nice and stable. So I'm going to paint this bottom half exactly the same as I've done some previous Star Wars models. So for that I'm going to start with some grey. I'm going to use a nice neutral grey and cover on these sort of honeycomb parts. So I've just added a couple of drops of pure white into that grey I just used, and I'm just going to use this to just do a little bit of sort of dabbing on each of the ones just to give it a bit more interest. And then I'm just taking some gunmetal silver and I'm going to paint it over these parts on either side. Topped off with some Nuln Oil. Now for the rest of the base of the chair and the posts and all that type of stuff, there isn't an awful lot of reference material to find, particularly around the sort of bottom section here. So I think a little bit of artistic license has been used with the sculpt, and I'm going to do the same thing with the paint job. What I can see obviously is primarily white, and I think there's some grey bands around the pipework. I'll probably paint in some of these little bits sort of silver, and just sort of take it from there really. So the first colour I'm going to use is some neutral grey. I'm going to paint in around the bands, and I think I'm going to do something, paint this line in as well around the post of the chair. Okay, so after all that painting of the parts of the base, I have sprayed all of the pieces with a nice satin varnish. So it has a slight reflective look, which makes it look slightly more metal-like. Last thing I'm going to do is take a little bit more of this pastel, and I'm just going to use this now just to sort of weather in some of these pieces, mostly sort of areas where they've got creases, that kind of thing, and just to dirty it up ever so slightly, so it isn't a pristine white. And then once I've done that, the model will be complete, so I'm going to put the thing together, which I think is going to be a little bit tricky because there's a lot of parts to glue, but nevertheless I will stick it all together and then I will come back and show you the final reveal. Okay then folks, that is Admiral Ackbar all finished, and I'm really quite pleased with this one. He was a little bit tricky to put together, as I thought it was a little bit of thinking to sort of work out how to put in the posts, connect to the feet and to the arms and all that type of thing. I ended up cutting off a couple of the connecting points on the posts, just so I had a bit more freedom of movement, but I got there in the end after a couple of attempts. And yeah, I think it's a really nice looking model. Really pleased with the pose, the overall size of it. It's quite an impressive piece. It is only 1/6 scale, but because he's, you know, quite stretched out and obviously he's quite tall because of on the chair, it takes up a little bit, good deal of space. But it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's really quite imposing. It's a nice sort of scale, nice size. Yeah, really quite happy with this one. Hi folks, okay, this is me from the future here. Now, 3 days after me putting this model together, unfortunately disaster struck. Now, as you can see, where I had glued it and I used proper epoxy, it has come apart. So yeah, after 3 days it was just sat on the table and he just, boom, he came off, the whole thing. Luckily there wasn't really any damage because, I say, it was just on a coffee table and I actually saw it happen. So yeah, luckily it wasn't on a shelf and didn't come crashing down. So what you've got, I mean, considering that model is pretty much printed hollow, but there's still quite a significant amount of weight there. And so this is the problem part. So as you can see, I have drilled a couple of holes in and I put a fairly hefty duty pins in here. They're probably about 4mm thick. So I drilled a couple of holes. I'm going to then pin those into the other part of the base and then it should be pretty secure. I can't see that going anywhere. Obviously it's all going to be glued up. So if I bring Ackbar back in, you can see the problem I've got is without having those pins in place, there's just going to be so much weight. There's no way that I'm going to be able to glue that and have it support and hold in place and stick. The thing eventually will just come off. Now the reason I've used 2 pins instead of 1, if I just put 1 pin in the centre, there's a good chance that it would fall probably this side, which is what it did before, as the weight, or it could go that way if it's in the centre. With 2, it can't go either side and it can't fall out that way either. So this should do it. So once these pins are in place, I just need to drill a couple of corresponding holes on that side, shove it all back together, glue it in, and we should be good. So I just wanted to put this out there just because anyone thinking of building this model, I would highly suggest you pin this before you attempt to put it together and paint it. So I think that'll just about do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of that, and I will see you very soon in the next one. Take care everyone.